Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Layo Larinde. The headlines. U.S. to arm Ukraine with anti-ship missiles. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, says the Donbass region is completely destroyed. Plus, Russia says it will not export food to its own detriment. Hello, good morning once again and welcome to the program. U.S. officials are considering arming the Ukrainian military with advanced anti-ship missiles. Citing the Biden administration officials, reports say the White House could offer Kyiv Boeing Harpoon and naval strike missiles with which to target the Russian Black Fleet, which is currently blocking Ukrainian ports. UK defense officials have said that around 20 Russian Navy vessels, including submarines, are active in that region. Officials also believe the arms could help force Russian ships away from Ukrainian territory and allow shipments of grain and other agricultural products to resume. However, the missiles, which cost around $15 million per round and have a range of 300 kilometers, are mainly sea-based missiles, meaning Ukraine could face difficulty firing it from shore. Finnish President Sauli Niinistö says Finland is open to discussing Turkey's concerns over its accession application to NATO, adding that the country is ready to commit to Ankara's security. Speaking at the White House, where President Joe Biden hosted the leaders of Finland and Sweden. That's after the formal submission of their NATO application. Mr. Biden said his administration is submitting reports on the two countries' NATO accession to Congress.
Today, I'm proud to assure them that they have the full, total, complete backing of the United States of America. Today, my administration is submitting to the United States Congress reports on NATO accession for both countries so the Senate can efficiently and quickly move on advising and consenting to the treaty. The bottom line is simple, quite straightforward. Finland and Sweden make NATO stronger, not just because of their capacity, but they're strong, strong democracies. And a strong, united NATO is the foundation of America's security.
The Turkish leadership has recently expressed concerns about our membership application. I want to address these concerns today. Finland has always had broad and good bilateral relations to Turkey. As NATO allies, we will commit to Turkey's security just as Turkey will commit to our security. We take terrorism seriously. We condemn terrorism in all its forms, and we are actively engaged in combating it.
President Niinistö and I have come here at a historic moment for our countries and for Sweden. After 200 years of military non-alignment, Sweden has chosen a new path. Yesterday, Sweden and Finland submitted our formal requests to join NATO.
NATO's General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg says it is not unusual for members of NATO to have different opinions, referring to Turkey's reluctance to accept Sweden and Finland's bid to join the defensive alliance. Speaking at a news conference alongside Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, Stoltenberg said that the bloc had a longer history of overcoming its differences. Finland and Sweden formally applied on Wednesday to join the US-led NATO, and that decision was spurred by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, the resistance is coming from Turkey, as Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says that he would reject the membership to the bloc over Ankara's claims that they harbor groups which Turkey deems to be terrorists.
The Atlantic family has responded to Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine with unprecedented unity. NATO fully supports Ukraine's right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter. That is why allies, including Denmark, are stepping up their support for Ukraine. Ukraine can win this war. I welcome, as you, Mette, the fact that Finland and Sweden have applied to join NATO. The security interests and concerns of all allies need to be taken into account. And I'm confident that we will come to a quick decision to welcome both Sweden and Finland to join the NATO family. Then we are 30 allies from both sides of the Atlantic with different history, geography, political parties in government, and sometimes there are some differences. But we have a long track record in NATO of being able to overcome differences and agree, and I'm absolutely certain that we also will be able to agree on this issue when we are after sitting down and discussing this issue together as NATO allies.
In the meantime, Turkey's objections have come as a surprise to the other members of the alliance. Mr. Erdogan drew comparisons to neighbors Greece rejoining NATO back in 1980. Turkey did not then object, but Erdogan now claims Greece harbors what he deems terrorists and fears the same would happen if Sweden and Finland are allowed membership. Ankara claims Sweden and Finland support groups that the country deems terrorists, namely the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, militant group, and Syrian Kurdish YPG, which it also views as a terrorist group that's closely tied to the PKK. Mr. Erdogan has said Sweden and Finland harbor and finance the groups and supplies them with weapons. That is the reason for his reluctance to admitting them to NATO. Let's move on to Ukraine now, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Donbas region has been completely destroyed. He says Russian forces had completely devastated the eastern Donbas region and accused Moscow of carrying out what he terms senseless bombardments as it intensified its offensive. According to the president, in the Donbas, the occupiers are trying to exert even more pressure. It is hell there, and that is not an exaggeration. He made this known in his usual late-night video address. Zelensky said Russian actions in the Donbas region are a deliberate and criminal attempt to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, adding that it constitutes as genocide of the people of Ukraine. Well, since turning away from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, Russia is using mass artillery and armor to try to capture more territory in the Donbas, and that's comprised of the Donetsk and Luhansk areas, which Moscow claims on behalf of separatists. Before now, Moscow had called its invasion a special military operation to rid Ukraine of fascists, an assertion Kyiv and its Western allies say is a baseless pretext for an unprovoked war.
We are ready. That is the message from this exercise. Forces from America, from Europe, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Poles, because Polish security is sacrosanct. On behalf of President Biden, I'm so pleased that America stands shoulder to shoulder with Poland in the face of the threat from the East. Thank you, Poland, for hosting the American troops here so well. 12,600 troops now in Poland, never before so many. Thank you, Poland, for being a humanitarian superpower, for showing the world how to welcome refugees.
All right, let's now go to President Volodymyr Zelensky's track, speaking about the complete destruction that Russia unleashed on the Donbas region.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue advancing to liberate the Kharkiv region. But in Donbas, the occupiers are trying to exert even more pressure. It is hell there, and it is not an exaggeration. The brutal and absolutely senseless bombardment of Severodonetsk. There were 12 killed and dozens wounded in just one day. The bombardment and shelling of other cities, air and missile strikes by the Russian army. All this is not just fighting during the war. Russian strikes on the Cherniv region, particularly the terrible attack on Desna. The removal of debris is ongoing there. Many killed. Constant strikes on the Odessa region, on the cities of central Ukraine. Donbas is completely destroyed.
The Russian-installed governor of occupied Kherson in southern Ukraine has said the region will soon be fully integrated into Russia. Volodymyr Saldo, who was installed by Russian forces after they took control of the area in early March, wrote on his Telegram page that it would become the Kherson region of the Russian Federation. His deputy, Kirill Stremusov, wrote that residents would be able to apply for Russian citizenship in the coming weeks when the situation stabilizes. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly warned that Moscow is planning a sham independence referendum in the region and also elsewhere. However, Russian officials have not confirmed that annexation of the occupied regions in southern Ukraine. They've not confirmed that, and they've not confirmed that it's imminent. And Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov earlier said this month that the future of the region depended on the will of the residents. Talking about food exports now, Russia says it will not export food to the detriment of its own markets. That's according to Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, and Dmitry Medvedev, saying that the West is to blame for its own cosmic cretinism. That's according to him, for the looming crisis. Well, in a lengthy Telegram post, Medvedev commented on recent statements by Western leaders about food securities. As Russia and Ukraine are the major wheat suppliers in the world, accounting for some 30% of global exports, the prices have significantly grown since the launch of the Russian military offensive in the neighboring states and subsequent sanctions imposed on Moscow by the US, EU and UK and some other Western nations. On Wednesday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that fertilizers and food products from Russia should be available to the world markets without obstacles. Well, Medvedev agrees that without wheat and other food supplies from Russia, the importing countries would have a very difficult time. But then he says they've got themselves to blame. In his opinion, the West is now backing up because all the sanctions, according to him, are worthless when it comes to vital things such as food and energy. According to him, Russia is ready to fulfill all of its obligations, but it has the right to expect some assistance from trading partners. Earlier on Thursday, Russian presidential advisor Maxim Oreshkin predicted a global famine, which, in his opinion, will start by the end of the year. Joining us now for more discussions on the program is Dr. Ben Alon-Mie, a retired professor of international relations at the New York University Center for Global Affairs. Thank you so much, Doctor, for speaking to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's begin with the expansion of NATO. Finland and Sweden, joining the military alliance, submitting their application. That was back on Wednesday. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is an extremely important development. It is the irony is that whereas Putin wanted to weaken NATO, to weaken the EU, end up now strengthening, in fact, NATO. So when you have Finland and Sweden added to NATO, He has strengthened it militarily. He has strengthened it from economically, and he's strengthened it in terms of a global perception that now NATO is not just united, but is stronger. And that is something he failed to realize, failed to expect.
Well, let's move now to the security aspect of, this war. What is your assessment of this war? Kherson, we're hearing, is close to joining Russia. That's according to the installed governor in that place. Who would we say is winning?
Winning in between the Ukrainian and Russian?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I was saying let's talk about the security aspect now. What is your assessment of this war so far?
Well, I think, I've said this many times before, obviously, I'm not alone. Putin miscalculated on a number of fronts. And he miscalculated the strength of the Ukrainian resistance. He miscalculated the speed by which the United States and its allies in Europe are going to react. He miscalculated the resiliency, the strength of his own military. He overestimated that strength. So he failed really to consider carefully what are the elements that he's been facing. And that is significant. And the result of this, we are only beginning to see that, to begin with, the Russian economy is going to suffer greatly in months and years to come. The military now is being humiliated in so many different ways. And that sends a very clear signal to the West, in particular, that the Russian army is not that mighty after all. Then you have, on the whole, Russia, who's been bragging about its strength economically, militarily, and otherwise, has shown that it doesn't have that capacity. And that will have also a long-term implication. So what happened here, it did not really work to his advantage. Having said that, and it is unfortunate, is that to reach some kind of an agreement, which I feel now Russia, Putin feels that he may have now to wind down the conflict. He will be one that he now capture the area of the Donbass, creating the link between the Crimea and to the north. He may now feel that it's time for him to sit down and begin perhaps a process of negotiation. To that end, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, with his counterpart, the Russians, so the military chiefs, started to talk. And that is now because I think Putin decided to cut his losses, and that is what we're going to see unfolding in the weeks to come.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says, Russia has completely destroyed the Donbass. Do you see Russia moving on to other regions, just like you said, they were not able to capture Kiev, and here Vladimir Putin is now cutting his losses?
It is really very difficult to say, predict what Putin might be thinking. But I think when we review the entire picture now and see what having suffered such military humiliation in so many different ways, in spite of all of that, and regardless of the fact what is right and what's wrong, in the end, to end this conflict, Russia, China, Putin would have to be somewhat get some kind of result that he can go back to his people and say, we actually won. Our objective was to conquer that area on the east and the south and the east. We have done so. We denazificated the country, and we have basically achieved our objective. And now I think sooner or later, in fact, sooner than later, he will probably be formally annexed that area that's been conquered so far, specifically following the fall of Mariupol. So that is where I think it's going, based on everything now we are witnessing. Whether the circumstances and the conditions change, and to the extent they would change in order to change his own strategic approach, I don't know that. But I can say that from all sides, I think we're going to be seeing Russia now focusing on controlling the region and beginning to send some feelers in terms of how to go from there, and knowing that in the end that a settlement will have to be accomplished. But unfortunately, Ukraine is going to have perhaps to surrender some territory in order to bring this to a conclusion, albeit this is not necessarily, of course, it's not the right thing, it's not right, but that's going to be necessitated by the conditions that have been created on the ground.
All right, Dr. Alonmir, well, we need to go on a break now, but please still remain with us. We'll come back to you after the break.
Of course.
Still ahead on the program. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak says half of Gazprom's 54 clients opened Gazprom bank accounts. They're still going strong. Join us again. Welcome back to the program. We have Dr. Ben Alonmir, a retired professor of international relations at the New York University Center for Global Affairs. Thank you, Doctor, for still holding on with us. Before we went on the break, we're talking about, the security aspect of this war. So many issues all around. I just wanted to let's go back to NATO membership and, the expansion and Sweden and Finland submitting their applications, which in turn is changing the architecture of NATO. However, Turkey is in opposition. He's citing that Sweden and Finland are harboring terrorists. President Erdogan says, they are terrorists. But we've seen Sweden and Finland visit U.S. President Joe Biden, and they're committing to Turkey's security. Do you think this could perhaps change Turkey's mind? Or if not, what could change Turkey's mind?
I feel very strongly, as a matter of fact, that Turkey will change its mind. That is Erdogan. Erdogan is, he wants something in return. Erdogan would like to see the sanctions are lifted that have been imposed on Turkey because of his purchase of the S-400 missile system from air defense system from Russia. He wants to go back and receive the kind of intelligence that NATO usually share with its members, that has Turkey been deprived of for some time because of what happened, because of that purchase. So he wants to, and he wants to make sure, of course, that Sweden, from his perspective, at least, will not harbor any PKK individual fighters that have been finding a refuge, some of them in the Sweden. So all these things, I think, will be ironed out as long as the main thing for him is to remove these sanctions and become more, go back to as a full-fledged member of NATO, the way it used to be with Turkey before the incident with the purchase of this air defense system from Russia. So I think in the end, he's going to be satisfied with the various these concessions that we made for him. This is what he wants. He's a negotiator, and this is an opportunity for him to achieve what he's been trying to achieve for some time now.
And do you see NATO, agreeing to these concessions just for him to be able to allow Sweden and Finland into NATO? Do you see them doing that?
The truth is, these concessions are not that significant. In fact, the NATO would have liked for some time ago to normalize complete relationship with Turkey as far as that goes. But for Turkey itself, stronger NATO, it's also good for Turkey. And everyone knows that only too well. So the Sweden and Finland joining the NATO is going to strengthen NATO. And this is very important for the entire organization. And I think Erdogan cannot afford, actually, to stick to his guns, so to speak, and say no in the end. The pressure will be on him will be enormous. And once these basic concessions are made, I don't have any doubt in my mind that Erdogan will concede, and Finland and Sweden will become members of NATO in very short order.
All right, finally, Dr. Ben, this war has affected so many things all around the world. Let's talk about the food aspect. Russia is saying it will export food to its own detriment, but we have the UN, calling for help because there's a global food crisis. When or do you think this war would end to be able to, get back to normal, so to speak?
Well, of course, hard to say when it's going to end. Again, like I said, probably, when you look at the reality now where things stand today, Putin will come soon to the conclusion that he basically achieved the minimum that he really wanted to achieve. His desire to conquer all of Ukraine did not work. He's going to settle on the Donbas region. And I think we're already seeing signs on both sides coming, specifically from Russia, willing now to sit down and resume the negotiation. That is a good sign. To me, that suggests that within the next few weeks, in a couple of months, the dynamics of the conflict will change. But sadly and unfortunately, Putin needs a pace-saving way out, and some concession will have to be made for him in order to achieve the larger goal, which is ending this conflict that has inflicted massive damage on the Ukrainian people and the country. Albeit Russia itself, that is its military as well, have suffered very significant humiliation. So I think we are getting to a point where both sides are carefully assessing where things stand. Although the Ukrainian will continue to fight, and they will, as for whatever it takes. But I think in the end, both sides sooner than later will come to this conclusion that the time perhaps has come to sit down and find some kind of a way out of this horrifying conflict.
All right, then, Dr. Ben Alon-Mayer, retired professor of international relations, New York University Center for Global Affairs. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Move on to other stories. In the Donetsk region, police have released video showing emergency services searching buildings for survivors after an attack on Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. Police say 3 buildings had been destroyed, but no deaths reported. A woman is seen in the video being helped away from a damaged building. In a social media post, the police said Russian shelling hit the buildings and destroyed it. Russia is still pressing its main offensive using massed artillery and ammo, trying to capture more territory in the eastern Donbas, comprising the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And Moscow is claiming these regions on behalf of pro-Russian separatists. French President Emmanuel Macron says he wants the European Union to give a quick opinion to Moldova's request for membership of the EU before meeting with Moldovan President Maia Sandu in Paris. Mr. Macron adds that a risk that the conflict between Ukraine and Russia could spread to other neighboring countries could not be ruled out. Fears have grown that Moldova could be drawn into the conflict in Ukraine after pro-Russian separatists in Moldova's Transnistria region blamed Kiev for what they said were shootings, explosions, and cross-border drone incursions. Last week, Moldova's Foreign Minister Nicu Popescu said there were internal elements in Moldova's pro-Russian separatist region trying to destabilize the area and stoke tensions as his country presses ahead with efforts to join the EU. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says the European Union must make preparations for rebuilding Ukraine after the war by setting up a solidarity fund to help cover the billions of euros reconstruction will cost. Addressing Parliament ahead of a meeting of EU leaders, Scholz said French President Emmanuel Macron was right that EU accession was not a matter of a few months or years, meaning it is all the more important to focus on pragmatic, immediate support. Mr. Scholz said he will travel to the Western Balkans before a meeting of the European Council takes place next month, bearing the message that the region belongs in the EU. The 6 Western Balkan countries with EU membership aspirations are Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. Well, these countries have been engaged in years-long reform process. Honoring commitments to them is not just a question of our credibility. Today, more than ever, their integration is also in our strategic interest, as according to Olaf Scholz addressing the Parliament. Britain has said it is introducing new sanctions against Russian airline sector to prevent state-owned Aeroflot, Ural Airlines and Rossiya Airlines from selling their unused landing slots at British airports. The British government said it estimates that the landing slots are worth £50 million. British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said in a statement that UK has already closed its airspace to Russian airlines. They're making sure they can't cash in their lucrative landing slots at UK airports. Every economic sanction reinforces UK's clear message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the UK will not stop until Ukraine prevails. Britain also said Aeroflot, Russia's biggest airline and majority owned by the Russian state, is providing services for the Russian government and is also generating revenue for the Kremlin. Well, UK has already sanctioned the company's chief executive. Well, for Rossiya Airlines, which is a unit of Aeroflot, while Ural Airlines is privately owned, all 3 are now subject to an asset freeze. The EU Commission is warning that it is not advisable for companies to go beyond the Commission's guidance on how to keep paying for Russian gas without breaching EU sanctions against Moscow for its invasion of Ukraine. Spokesperson Eric Mama made this known during his regular news briefing. Companies in the European Union have been scrambling to confirm how to keep buying Russian gas after Moscow demanded foreign buyers start paying in rubles and cut gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria for refusing to do so.
I have been very clear on what our position is here. We have given guidance to the member states that says what it is that they can do. And what it is that they can do is open a bank account in the currency of the contract that they hold with Gazprom, make the payment to that bank account in the currency of the contract, and issue a statement saying that for them this means that they have fulfilled their contractual obligations. And we do not consider that doing anything else is advisable. Now, again, it is for the member states of the European Union to implement the sanctions and ensure that they are correctly applied by energy companies.
The Kremlin says Russia has no hope of starting up its undersea gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, anytime soon, but is confident that Europe will need the pipeline someday. Germany halted the Baltic Sea gas pipeline project designed to double the flow of Russian gas directly to Europe's biggest economy, as Russia formally recognized 2 breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine as independent, as days before sending tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in what Moscow calls its special military operation. Half of Russian gas giant Gazprom's clients have opened accounts at Gazprom Bank. Well, this statement is according to the Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak. Seeking to compel its clients to pay for its gas in rubles, Russia halted gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland in April after they refused to meet its demand, raising fears that other states could be next. Finland's state-owned energy provider, Gasum, refused to switch to the new scheme and says this week it would take its dispute over ruble payments with Russia Gazprom Export to arbitration proceedings. Novak told the Forum on International Relations that some big companies had already paid for Russian gas under the new scheme and that Moscow would soon know which companies had paid and which had refused to do so. Nearly all the supply contracts EU companies have with Gazprom are in euros or dollars, and some top Western companies have already opened accounts at Gazprom Bank. Russia will send any oil rejected by European countries to Asia and other regions. That's what Novak said, adding that Europe would have to find substitute supplies that might be more expensive. Western sanctions imposed on Russia after its troops marched into Ukraine in February forced a number of oil buyers to delay or refuse cargoes, which in turn knocked Russian oil production. Novak said Russian oil production was about 1 million BPD lower than in April, but had increased by 200,000 to 300,000 in May, with more volumes expected to be restored next month. We'll take a break now on the program. When we return, the World Anti-Doping Agency to conduct virtual doping audits for Russia. Please stay with us for more details. Welcome back to the program. We have in the studio, as usual, our business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa. Hello, Ini.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with this story that we took, before going on break. Gazprom saying that half of its clients have opened, bank accounts.
Yes, we talked about it earlier.
We did on Wednesday, and you were saying, that some have secretly opened.
In fact, from what I've read, about 8 companies in Germany. Germany is like one of the highest consumers of gas from Russia. 8 of them, not being named, have already opened this rubles accounts that Russia has asked for. And then this week we talked about ENI in Italy.
Yes,
Italy is also a major consumer of gas from Russia. So and whether this information is put out there the open or not, one of the consequences of this is that we see the ruble, that's the Russia's currency, doing very well. Yes. At the beginning of this war, the ruble went down to, you could use 133 rubles to buy $1. As we speak, it has gone up to 63. And analysts are saying that it will soon hit 60. So you can imagine the movement from 163 to 60 or 63 to $1. It's been declared the best performing currency for the year already. So you imagine that if all of these sanctions are supposed to be breaking down economic strength of Russia, how come the currency is performing so well? It's because of, things like this. There are some transactions which are not being
on the ground.
Exactly, because that means that there's more demand for the ruble. And once there's more demand for anything at all, then the value goes up.
Yeah.
That's what is happening here. So, I don't know how the EU is going to handle this.
Well, they've been warning. They've been warning that companies should not go behind their guidance.
Countries would, it's self-preservation. Countries want to take care of their own. Corporates want to take care of their own. Okay, would you tell a country like India that has a lot of demand, where do you want them to get power from for their manufacturing, for their households?
They can't do without it.
Yeah, where do you want them to get it from? Even though they are not in support of the war, but if they don't have a dependable alternative, then what do you want to... The UK has gone to UAE and tried to have alliance with them, so that they can get supply, but it's not really working, at least for now. So what do you want those countries? US has promised to give oil, but even US, I mean, already they have to build back their reserve. The reserve is down because of what they've done, you know, to buffer the increase in the price of oil. And I mean, they bought a gallon or a liter of oil, petrol, for about $5. How will people live? So they had to go to their reserve, and now they have to find a way to close that back. So, I mean, it's unfortunate for the world.
In all of this, it's telling me, you know, we can't really do without Russian gas, without Russian food.
It's no longer news. It's no longer news that, I mean, if Russia has the highest reserve of gas, I don't know how. I mean, I've forgotten, is it the IMF that had said it, that you cannot easily plug the supply of gas and oil that Russia gives to the world, especially European countries. Even if you want to look onto Africa, you don't even have that much reserve capacity, and it's not even developed, you know. So it's a very tight one. We do hope that the war will end.
That is the prayer.
You know,
we say it every day. That is the prayer.
And unfortunately, you know, still talking about the ruble, Kherson, they're using the ruble there. So that's also adding more demand to ruble, making it more valuable, making it another best performing currency. So there's so many ways to it, and it's complicated for the world, not for just any country.
Let's talk about, you know, the Google in Russia is set to file for bankruptcy.
Well, they say they cannot meet up with their responsibility obligations anymore. They can't pay staff, they can't pay their suppliers. So when the war started, Google stopped taking adverts, Russian adverts, you know, from the state media and all of that. And they got fined. They got fined about $98 million. Guess what? That's 8% of what they are worth in Russia. Wow. So they pay that. And then the state told them to reinstate those adverts, and they refused. So they got fined again $15 million. So how do you expect a company, you know, to survive? Yeah, so because of that, they've not been able to meet up with their responsibility. They can't pay supplies, they can't pay operation costs, they can't take care of salaries and all that. So they're filing for bankruptcy, and that's 100 jobs on the line right there. Maybe the Russian government has been doing well in taking up some of those responsibilities, some of those corporates, you know, that have left. We talked about McDonald's, and how, the corporate is taking it. Yes, they're living with their outlets now being sold to an individual in the country. Don't be surprised that that individual has the corporate, the backing of the government. Exactly. So that's what's going on in Google now. They can't afford all of that, and maybe they will also sell off and leave at the end of the day.
Well, thank you so much, Ini, our business correspondent.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
More soldiers stranded in the Azovstal steelworks appear to be surrendering to Russia after being holed up in the besieged Mariupol. And according to the Russian Defense Ministry, nearly 800 fighters surrendered on Thursday. The evacuation marks the likely end of the battle for the southern Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, which lies in ruins after weeks of relentless Russian bombardment. Or elsewhere, on Thursday in Ukraine, the first trial in Kiev of a Russian soldier accused of war crimes resumed. And the 21-year-old is asking for forgiveness from the widow of the man he killed. His trial heard that he was ordered to kill the civilian.
Russia's defense ministry says that 771 Ukrainian fighters had surrendered from the Azovstal steelworks in the devastated Ukrainian city of Mariupol in the last 24 hours. Some of the men purported to be surrendered Ukrainian fighters from the Azov regiment could be seen with crutches and eye patches in the footage released by the ministry. Russia's defense ministry released new footage on Thursday of what it claims are Ukrainian soldiers from a besieged steel plant. In the video, some of the men that appear to be in a room with bunk beds are speaking on camera, about the conditions of their detention. They say they are being given food and housing and are being treated well. It's not possible to establish if the men were speaking freely.
Help has been given to my fellow officers. I was assured that everything was good. The seriously wounded were taken out, at least at the first stage where I was. I asked. They assured me that everything was fine, that they did the bandages for them. So I hope that some kind of treatment will continue.
Mariupol is the biggest city Russia has captured so far and allows Russian President Vladimir Putin to claim a rare victory in the war. In the meantime, a Russian soldier accused of war crime on Thursday apologized in court to the widow of a man he's accused of killing in cold blood. In a trial that has huge symbolic importance for Kyiv, the 21-year-old Russian tank commander is charged with murdering the unarmed 62-year-old civilian in the northeastern Ukrainian village of Chupakivka on February 28th. On Wednesday, he pleaded guilty and, if convicted, could be sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, more sanctions continue to hit Russia, the latest coming from the UK against the Russian airline sector. Britain said it was introducing new sanctions against state-owned Aeroflot, Ural Airlines and Rossiya Airlines to prevent them from selling their unused landing slots at British airports. The British government says it estimated the landing slots were worth £50 million. On a lighter note, President Vladimir Zelensky addressed Ukrainians in a video message on Thursday to wish them health on Vyshyvanka Day, the day of the traditional embroidered shirt. Still photographs taken in Lviv on Thursday showed women dancing and people wearing the Vyshyvanka, which is an integral part of the national Ukrainian costume. Babies also joined the Embroidery Day celebrations. Newborns in the Odessa Regional Maternity Hospital received their first presents. Girls were given shirts with red ornaments, boys with blue.
In sports news, Russian mixed martial arts fighter Ashkab Magomedov has been arrested in Moscow for allegedly extorting a minor. Magomedov allegedly extorted 600,000 rubles from an unnamed teenager, threatening the minor with violence and blackmail. The minor paid a portion of the demanded sum in October 2021. However, after the minor's mother reported the incident to the police, Magomedov was arrested at a hotel on the outskirts of Moscow. The criminal case has been initiated under Article 163 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Magomedov faces up to 7 years in prison if convicted. The World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, plans to conduct a virtual audit of the non-compliant Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA, after a planned audit earlier this year was postponed following the invasion of Ukraine. RUSADA was declared non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code in December 2019 after the country was found to have manipulated data at the Moscow laboratory. WADA initially imposed a 4-year package of punishments, but this was cut to 2 years by a 3-member court of arbitration for sport panel in December 2020. Russia's name, flag and anthem is banned from World Championship and Olympic events, with the country also unable to host or be granted the rights to stage major competitions. And that's it on the program this morning and for the week. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Layo Olarinde. Have a great weekend.